We're delighted to have one of the founders of pro football as our guest, and a friend of mine of many, many years. A man that I really, I've had a great feeling about for all the years that we've known each other. George Halas, perhaps has done more for pro football than anybody in this area. And I would like to call your attention to the fact that there's a wonderful new book about George Halas called Halas by Halas. And I recommend it to you most enthusiastically. I know that you're certainly going to enjoy it. You know, George, I was interested in the footnote of your book. You were in a Rose Bowl game back in 1919.
Yes, Bob. That was with the Great Lakes team when we played the Marines, and we happened to win that game. September 1st, 1919.
Oh, just think, that's 60 years ago.
How true.
George, actually, in your book you have it there, but some of our listeners don't know exactly. How did the Bears get started?
Well, Bob, originally, in 1919, I played against Jim Thorpe's Canton team. And as we were walking off the field, I said, Jim, it'd be great if we got together and formed a league. He says, fine, I'll talk to my manager. And we did. Eventually, we got together, Bob, on September 17th, 1920. A letter was sent, and we gathered in Canton, Ohio, and there were a matter of 12 men, or rather 12 men representing 12 teams. And that's how we got it. We originally called it the American Professional Football League. And with Jim Thorpe as president, we needed his publicity. However, Jim was a better football player than he was president. And as a result, we got Joe F. Carr of Columbus as our president, and we changed the name of the league to the National Football League.
Well, you just brought up the name of a wonderful man, Joe Carr.
Oh, he was a wonderful man. I tell you, he did see to the league that made progress in every instance. In those days, we didn't have New York. So Joe Carr took it upon himself to go to New York, and that's how we happened to get Tim Mara.
Let's talk a little bit about a few of the legendary characters that you've known in your time. You've already mentioned one, Jim Thorpe. I was thinking of Cash and Carry Pyle.
Cash and Carry Pyle, he was something. He was a delight. I'll say one thing for him. He did a great job for Red Grange, and his word was his bond. He was splendid to work with in every respect.
How great a player was Thorpe?
Thorpe? Well, of course, he was the greatest. I mean, in one instance, we got to the 1-yard line, and this was in 1919. We got to the 1-yard line, and Gil Falcon was about to go over for a touchdown when Jim Thorpe, from defensive halfback, took a running start, and he met Gil Falcon 2 yards behind the scrimmage. And that's what a great man he was defensive. Offensively, there's no question. And as I mentioned, on the 1-yard line, then it was Jim Thorpe's time to punt. And he kicked the ball over Patty Driscoll's head, and it was good for 80 yards. He was good in every respect. Offense, defense, punting, place kicking.
I was interested the other day when Congress came up with the suggestion that his Olympic medal should be restored and given to his family.
I agreed wholeheartedly with that idea, and I hope they do it.
Well, I certainly hope so, too. Cash and Carry Pyle, he's the man responsible for the cross-country tour?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. He lost a lot of money going from California to New York, and it was quite a show. And he thought, well, he made a mistake. He thought he'd do it from New York to San Francisco, and then again he lost a lot of money, so he gave up the idea.
George, did you ever dream in the early days that 500,000 people would watch a pro game on a Sunday and another 100 million would be looking at it on the tube? Did you ever dream that?
No, I didn't, Bob. I hadn't the slightest idea. And it is really wonderful to think that this game has developed in a short time.
Yes. What about the advent of the forward pass? Is it true that Rockne and Gus DeRay were responsible for that?
Yes, they were. In a college game, they did have a pass, and they threw it end over end, you know. And then the fellow that really did a great job for us in the National Football League was Benny Friedman. He was the one that was able to throw that spiral pass, which was previously developed by Bob Zupke.
Bob Zupke with his famous flea flicker play. You see it occasionally in a pro game.
Yes, you do. As a surprise start, it's good for one or two plays, but beyond that, it's lost as a...
Yeah. George, you've been close to three great college names, Rockne, Alonzo Stagg, and Bob Zupke. What did they each contribute, in your opinion, to the great game of football?
Well, of course, one thing is certain. Bob Zupke was an innovator. He was a great innovator, and he was responsible for the flea flicker and other great plays of that nature. And Stagg, of course, when he had 5 yards McCarthy, he could grind those yards out and nobody could beat him. He was a splendid coach.
What about, did you know Rockne well?
Very well. Rockne I knew very well. In fact, my brother coached as an assistant coach, my brother Waller, for a year, and then Waller took over as head baseball coach and basketball coach. But Rockne, speaking about Rockne, he was an enthusiast. I had the pleasure of being in the dressing room at halftime, and I never heard a more inspiring talk that Rockne gave in that game. And of course, they went out and knocked the tar out of the opponents.
Well, he was recognized as a real super salesman.
That he was in every respect. And of course, he did a great job with his Notre Dame shift, which was quite new at that time.
Well, now they say that you're responsible for the T formation.
No, I'm not. They started with the T formation in 1920 when Dutchstrom and I coached, and that's because we learned that from Bob Zupke. However, we didn't do so well, and in 1929 I suggested we bring in another coach, which was Ralph Jones, who was my basketball coach, and he was a freshman football coach at Illinois. And we brought him in, and he put in the modern T formation with the man in motion. And as you know, Bob, over the years, we did quite well with the Bears, and when we defeated Washington 73-0, we just had just a great many number of letters to tell us seeking information about the T formation. And that's when the T formation starts spreading all over the country, as it is now.
George, what do you recall about the T formation with the shift? Remember, the Cardinals used to shift.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, the T formation with the Cardinals, for example, used to shift into a box right or left.
Oh, that was one of the things permissible with the T formation. You could go into anybody. You could shift right, you could shift left, you could go into the double wing, you could go in the unbalanced line, because we had guards back at that time. So from the modern T formation with the man motion, you could go into any formation.
Do you remember the interesting way when a team would get down on the 5 or 6 yard line and they'd have that T formation and they'd shift, they'd pull the other side offside?
Oh yes, that was done, and the Cardinals were very good at that.
I can remember that. I can remember a game that you and the Cardinals played in a snowstorm at Sox Park. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. And as I remember, they gave us a pretty good beating.
Another game that you'll remember that very few people realize happened was the game that you played in the Chicago Stadium.
Oh, well, of course, that particular year, 1932, the weather was atrocious, almost as bad as the weather we had this past winter. And so consequently, we just couldn't play outside, and went inside and played at the Chicago Stadium to a packed house. It was
I was there. I broadcast that game.
I know you did, Bob. That was a great game. And the winning touchdown was from Bronco Nagurski to Red Grange.
Yes. Oh, I'll never forget that. And, the game played inside like that. Everything was comfortable. But of course, football is an outside game.
Yes, that's true. But as a result of that game, two great rules. I was able to put in two fine rules. The football rules at that time, whenever you went offside, over the sideline, you would only bring it back 1 yard. So, but in this case, there were 2 by 12s, would consisted of our sideline. And so when we had the league meeting, I suggested we put in a rule where when you go over the sideline, why the ball would be back 15 yards, which was a great thing, which opened up the game. We also put the new rule in that you could pass from anywhere behind the line of scrimmage. Those two rules were the result of that indoor game that you mentioned.
Our guest today, and we're delighted to have him, is one of the great football figures of all time and a great friend of mine, George Halas. We'll be back with our guest in just a moment. You often hear a term applied that, in my opinion, is often misapplied, and that is when they call a person a legend in his own time. But I think you can apply that, and rightfully so, to George Halas. He's a wonderful man. He's been a dear friend of mine for 40 or 45 years. He's been the backbone of pro football all these years, and a great, great credit to the game. And he was a great coach. Sid Luckman and I were talking about you as a coach the other day, George, and I'm sorry you didn't hear that show.
Gee, I wish I had, Bob. I wish you'd called me on that, because I like any show that Sid's on, because he is doing a great job.
What about the changes in the game since way, way back? What about the advent of the forward pass? Do you feel that it's overly used today?
Well, no, I don't think so, Bob. Of course, we started out with the National Football League. We had a ball that was somewhat ballooned. So it was not used very much until Ben Friedman came in. Benny Friedman did a great job. He was the top-notch passer in the 20s. And
yes, I remember. From the University of Michigan.
That's correct.
Is that the only time, in your opinion, that the size or the shape or the weight of the ball has been changed?
Well, it was reduced again in 1932 by Wilson and Company. And that helped the forward passing more and more. And as it is today, it's a great game, Bob, including the passing and the running.
Well, it really is. And when you have a combination of the passing and the running, you really have it. I'd like to ask you about some of the great quarterbacks you've seen. And George, what about your own self when you were coaching? Did you send the plays in, or did you let the quarterback call the plays?
Bob, the quarterback, in my case, the quarterback always called the play. And except on special occasions where it was so obvious that their defense could be penetrated with another type of play. But Luke Johnsos would call down to me, and I would only on occasions use it, because he called some great plays, and we did use it. But I was only on special occasions like that the quarterback didn't call his plays. In my case, quarterback always called the plays, and they should, because you work all week with the quarterbacks, and then you go up and down the field with an offense where you'd call one play on your own 20, another on your own 30, another in the middle of the field, and one on the opponent's 20-yard line. So I believe in that. And although you got to hand Dallas, they do such a great job sending in all the plays, and so you cannot discount that entirely. But it was just my version that I like to have the quarterback call his own plays.
A good friend of yours and mine, Paul Brown with Cleveland, had a great quarterback, Otto Graham.
Yes.
And nevertheless, he sent in about 85% of the plays.
That's true. He really did. And had great success with him. And, of course, even up to now, Paul Brown, associated with Cincinnati, his coach still sends in the plays and doing a good job.
I was noticing in a magazine article published just recently that you named Sid Luckman as the greatest quarterback. How would you say that Luckman, of course I know how you feel about Sid Luckman, and everybody feels he was a great quarterback. How would you compare Luckman with Sammy Baugh?
Well, we played against Sammy Baugh, and we happened to beat him with Sid Luckman as our quarterback. But Sammy Baugh was a great quarterback. There's no question about that. But he was up against a team that really wanted to win that ball game because they defeated us 7-3 2 weeks prior.
You're talking about the 73-0 game.
That's right.
Oh, that was. People wondered, did you pour it on in that game, or did it just happen that way?
Well, no, Bob. After that first game that they beat us 7-3, they called us crybabies and a first half team. So when we were leading substantially at halftime, we remembered that we were only play good in the first half. So we just played our normal because we were really hot that day. It was a perfect game, my estimation.
It must have been. George, what do you recall? Let's mention some of the personalities that you've known over the years. Let's talk a little bit about the late Charlie Bidwell and the Cardinals. You know, a lot of people don't realize that there were 2 pro teams in this city at one time.
Yes, there were. I think I was responsible for Charlie Bidwell buying the Cardinals. Dr. David J. Jones bought the Cardinals from Chris O'Brien, and he had them for 5 or 6 years. He got Ernie Nevers, and they had some very good seasons. And then after 5 or 6 years, Dr. Jones got pretty busy as city physician, and so I knew he wanted to sell us, so I suggested to Charlie Bidwell that he buy the Cardinals from Dr. Jones, and he did, and he made an offer. He asked Dr. Jones his price, and Dr. Jones said he asked $150,000. So in a few days, Charlie called me, and he said, I'd like to get together again with Doctor. And he said, I'm willing to pay the $150,000. That was twice the amount that the doctor paid Chris O'Brien. So it was a good deal all the way around.
I should say so. George Halas, does pro football have the balance today that you'd like to see it have? What about the have-nots? What's being done? What type of a draft do you have in pro football? Why should the teams that are first, second, or third, or fourth have even a chance in the draft? Why not help the have-nots and let them do the drafting?
Well, Bob, you know, when we any draft, but it was Bert Bell. In those days, in the 30s, early 30s, there are 3 teams that dominated the league: New York Giants, Green Bay Packers, and the Bears. And nobody could come close to us because we had the crowds and we had good teams and players wanted to play with us. And the have-nots had no chance to get these teams. So Bert Bell in 1934 devised the player draft in which the last team gets first pick. And that has helped substantially.
What is it today?
Same thing, same draft. I mean, the last teams get the first pick, and the first team gets the last pick.
Well, that's helped. That helps to put things in balance, doesn't it?
Substantially. Like this past season, we had a beautiful draft, a wonderful draft. And that's the reason it's true. We got quite a few players hurt, but we're coming out of it a little bit. And once these players come back, we'll have a very good team.
Yeah. You know, George, that's why today, almost on any given day, any team can beat anybody else. Look at Green Bay the other night.
Oh, they were hot, weren't they? They were hot. I tell you, they beat a good team, too.
What do you recall about a man who I know you were close to and you had admired a lot, Curly Lambeau?
Curly Lambeau was a great competitor, as shown by the competition between the Green Bay Packers and the Bears. He was a great competitor, a good player himself, incidentally, and he gave us many a trouncing, and of course on other years why we reciprocated.
Yeah. His, I can remember I saw him, in Washington just a few years ago, just a few weeks before his death, and everybody I talked to remarks about his contributions to the game of pro football. He must have had a great football mind, George.
He did have a great football mind. As a player, you know, he was a quarterback, so it must have been pretty sharp to do that, and that he carried on with that type of play as a coach. And he was a fine competitor and a tough one.
Yes.
And so I always had a great amount of respect for Curly.
George Halas, it seems like pro football has a great has great leadership in Pete Rozelle.
He is undoubtedly the finest commissioner that the NFL has ever had, and that goes also for all major sports. He's a great commissioner.
Now, I know you remember Judge Landis.
Oh, I should say I do. Of course, he was a great commissioner. He was a tough guy.
Now, Lambeau's power, how much power does Lambeau have? I mean, how much power does the present commissioner have?
Oh, he has total control, Bob. He can control the owners. I mean, for example, if any owner bets, he can immediately disfranchise him. He has great power, which I'm pleased to see. And he has done a great job for us in radio and especially in television.
Yes. Now, the television money that each club gets today really helps the have-nots, doesn't it?
It's true, Bob, because with the player salaries of today, you never could meet the payroll with just full stadiums. You need that television money.
And how much does each club get?
Well, Bob, it's up in the millions now, I'm happy to say.
That really helps a have-not. George, is there anything you'd like to see different? Anything in the rules? Anything you'd like to see in the way of a change in pro football?
Bob, right now, I think we're at our peak as far as playing the game. We could put in a few more rules, a few more safety features, perhaps.
You're satisfied with the number of officials that operate in each game?
Oh, I hope to goodness we don't get another one. I think they're pretty crowded out there.
I can remember, and I'm trying to think of his name, one of the early officials in pro football who was a very good friend of yours.
Bobby Kahn?
Bobby Kahn.
Oh, he was a honey. He was a small guy, but he had great verve for the game. And, those days I had the privilege, it seemed, of running out on the field.
I remember.
And, this time, he called a misplay, and I ran out on the field, and he saw me coming, and he threw his whistle down. I picked it up and walked back to the sideline, so he never did that again. Another occasion, he called a play against us, and I said, "Bobby Kahn, you stink." He walked off 15 yards, and he said, "How do I smell from here?"
Our guest today, and we're delighted to have him, one of the real pioneers who's made so many great contributions to the game of pro football, is George Halas. We'll be back with our guest in just a moment. George, in the years ahead, do you foresee any more expansion in pro football?
Bob, it won't be for, 3 or 4 more years at least. I mean, that's the planning of our very good commissioner, Pete Rozelle. And I agree with that. There's no need to have any more teams now until all teams are on an equal basis.
Yes. There are people that feel that when baseball had 2 8-team leagues, that was perfect. And now that expansion has watered the product down, he would probably do the same thing in football.
Not at the present number. We thought that Seattle may be a question mark. And by gosh, lo and behold, they're one of the best drawing teams in the league. So we made no mistake in covering that territory, because that was the only territory really available, or open, you might say.
Well, the only territory where there is no pro football is in the Southwest.
In the Southwest? Oh, yeah, we have Texas.
That's right, you got Dallas, that's
yes.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So there really is no place where pro football is not represented.
Yeah, probably halfway down to New Orleans. I'm just pulling that out of the hat, Bob. But that might be a situation.
Yes, they have a big stadium down there, and a lot of people have thought that maybe pro football and maybe baseball would do well in that stadium. It costs them millions and millions of dollars.
And a very good stadium.
Yes.
And the capacity is great.
How do you feel about a stadium in Chicago?
Well, Bob, I was hoping and praying for one for many, many years. And there's a possibility of one. I can't say too much about it because I don't know, really.
Well, you don't know how our new mayor feels about it.
Well, I know she's most cooperative and is a very fine mayor, and I think she can see the quality of it. And at least I hope so.
Well, George, you've really seen the growth of this game where it came from nowhere when you got started today. As I said, 100 million people are looking at the games every Sunday, as well as all the millions that are in the various stadiums in the country.
Yes, that's true, Bob. I know our TV ratings show that we, on TV, we have 1.5 million watching our games on TV. That's amazing.
That's a lot of people. Are you satisfied with the present Bears?
I can see where there will be some improvement next year. And if we get some of our players back that were injured, I'd be real pleased with them.
George, we're very grateful to you, and I've enjoyed ever so much talking to you. I very value our friendship.
Thank you, Bob. I value yours very much.
Thank you. Our guest today has been George Halas, one of the founders of pro football, a man who's really been the backbone of this game. We've enjoyed very much having him with us. Now, this is Bob Elson saying have a happy weekend. We'll see you next Saturday at the usual time.